Good morning. Continuing our review and summary, the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1447. On page 1447. Good. And we're learning about, well, now it's generally broadened into the different levels, and you can also say historical eras, different stages in history of different levels of revelation of the divine, and how many memutzayim, intermediaries or interfaces, which of course is relevant to the entire theme of Ayin Beis, which is all about interface. The interface between God, godliness and existence, between the levels of God that are transcendent and the immanent levels that relate to existence, as we've been learning throughout the whole Hemshech. So here he's discussing specifically, it's in context of the neshamas as they come down below and they manifest within bodies and animal soul. And therefore, there's an entire cosmic support system, as we called it, which includes the angels, the malachim that we're discussing, that help support and draw, distribute, like the ministers of a king in his empire that help him govern. Obviously, they work for the king, they represent the king, but nevertheless, it helps delegate and allocate different functions, which is really the role of a government and all its ministers and ambassadors and all its employees, so to speak. So the same thing Hashem created. Actually, the reason that way it's lamata in the physical world is because lamayla, say Malchus da'ara ke'en Malchus de'rekia. The empires, the kingdoms below is ke'en, is similar to the kingdom above. So we have an example below that helps us understand how God governs his world. So God is the only God. There's only one king, Hashem Echad. That's clear. And yet, there's a whole ishtalshelus that Hashem employs, that Hashem created, that helps him achieve that, not because Hashem needs help, or because we need help. We need it on our terms. And God doesn't want to just do Kol Yochel. Of course, he can do whatever he wants. But he wants it to be in a way we understand it, and also in a way that we can retrace the steps and connect with him on our terms, as well as on his terms. So that's what the role of interfaces in general are. But here specifically, we moved into the place that why neshama is needed, because we're in Golus. So even though we need a Seder Shtalshalis regardless, even Adam and Chava and Gan Eden, and even by Matan Torah, even the highest levels, there was a Seder Shtalshalis. But of course, it gets far more complex and far more difficult when you're dealing with Golus, with a concealment as a result of human flaws and human transgressions and so on. So all that, but he said, B'zeh Zman HaGolus, that's where the neshamas mekablim avi yirish shalahem al yidei hamalochim. The main featured malach here is Matat, because as he called him the Mamuna and the Melech of all malachim. So to speak, the supervisor of all the supervisors, and Melech, the king of all the supervisors, called supervisors. The different names we've used for it, and as a result of discussing Matat, he began to discuss the pasuk in Pasha Mishpatim, the psukim, I should say, where God talks about the angel that he sends as a result of the Chet HaEgel to and help the Yidden achieve what they have to achieve. Obviously, with God working behind, it's God's force, it's God's angel. And we also learned there are different levels of angels that are, and ministers, like the Ayin Sarim, where they're more of an identity, to the point that it could even be misunderstood by their subjects, and they could end up worshiping the sun of the month, thinking that the sun and the moon have some type of power of its own. Malach Matat, you don't have that issue because Malach Matat is complete bottle, but it's still a mamutza. And that's why God still has to say, as we learned from the Medrash, that don't give any credence to matat. Still, he's my angel. He's my shliach. Literally like a shliach and a meshaleach. So a shliach, even though a shliach is shluchish shalodim k'moisei, like we said about matat, that his name is the name of Hashem, but he is a shliach. He's an independent entity. He's a bardas, and as such, he has free will, and he could be more of an identity, or he could be less of one. Okay, now where did we go from there? So in discussing this whole thing of matat being this level of mamut, still being a mamutza, but one that's batul, we learned that is why so Moshe Rabbeinu was higher than that level. But Yeshua, when he went into Eretz Yisrael, he now became a leader in his own right. So he's no longer as he is Malchus, as Malchus is in Atzilus receiving from Moshe. So here Hashem sends the Malach, but Matat as he is b'madregos el yeno, as he is in Atzilus. As we know, Matat is the two levels, Matat and Atzilus, Matat as he goes down Biyah. Mashenkin kasher b'yitzira. But then as Matat descends below into Bria and then to Yitzira, Shenifred mebchinas Eretzel, that is already another level, and that's dafka a Golus level. Yeshua is not Golus. Yeshua is lower than Moshe, as we learned, but still not Golus. And which is this level? This is Harizeh Kamo Yecheskel. Yecheskel, who saw the Shechina ba'adi b'seich hagoyla, after the destruction of the first temple in Bavel, in Babylon. And what did he see? He saw the Merkava, Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sher, the chariot, the vehicle, that already has more structure. So it's already a lower level. It's still a Merkava. A Merkava means a chariot and a vehicle to godliness. It doesn't have its own separate agenda, but it's taking on more shape and form and more identity. And Yecheskel saw Bizman Shachar Achurm Keshagol Lebavel Shchina Imam Bani B'Seichel Geil. And that's why it's Bislapshus and a Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sher. Because in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the Shekhinah was in a higher level of revelation, as it was Matan Torah, where it says Ponim Beponim, Dibur Hashem Imachem. Ponim Beponim, face to face, indicates that there's no garments, there's no bleach, Shumim Tzoyz Bislapshus Klal. That's what face to face means. When you don't speak to someone face to face, you're either speaking through a third party, or you're speaking through a partition or some type of filter. But that's Matan Torah, and that's also Beis HaMikdash. And that's where we stopped technically reading. So now he's going to go into a longer discussion about comparing all these levels. So let's sum them up. There's Moshe Rabbeinu, there's Matan Torah, the Beis HaMikdash. They're more or less the same level. Obviously, there's maybe some distinctions, but in this context, so far, there's the same level. There's Yeshua as the next generation. And then there's Yecheskel that's already in Golus after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So he's now going to discuss and compare these different levels. That's what we're going to learn in the next few pages. Then he's going to come back and go back to the topic at hand, which is the Malach Matat, its role. So we know Matat has two roles so far. One during the time of Yeshua, and then there's Matat as he revealed in Yetzirah. That's more connected to Yecheskel already in Golus. But either way, there's a Malach involved. In the state of Geula, complete Geula, you don't need the Malach, Hashem himself, like we learned earlier. So now we're going to learn this. I'll go slowly, step by step. It's a long parenthesis right now. Then he goes back to Matan Torah. The parenthesis he's now going to discuss the difference between is Yeshua and the Beis HaMikdash the same level or not. He's going to say it's not. But we'll break it down. He's going to also go back to the Avos. People ask the question, what about Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov? What Gili did they have in context of all of this? He's going to discuss that as well. And of course, compare it to Moshe Rabbeinu. So we're going to have the different, as I said, stages, different levels of revelation. As I was thinking about it, I realized that this is very much also can be linked very closely to what we learned earlier, if you recall, when he talked about the written Torah and the oral Torah. So he said, by Moshe Rabbeinu, was Chachmei Law radiated and illuminated Chachmei Tata. So when he saw Chachmei, so Moshe Rabbeinu also received the oral Torah. But there, it was so clear, and until it was written down in the Mishnayos by Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, as we learned, there was a certain crystal clarity that they had. That's why they didn't have to write it down. When they started writing it down because they were forgetting it, then it started going into a darker state. And the Gemara, if you remember, is already the students trying to understand what their teachers were teaching. So what do you see from that? In Torah, also an evolution of Torah, that the levels by Matan Torah and the earlier generations, Torah was illuminated, and it was very clear. That's why you didn't need the whole elaboration of the Talmud, because they saw it clearly in the verses and their interpretations in the Mishnah. Later, the Mishnah is, of course, brief. Later, it started developing into more details. So there, too, he spoke about the different levels of revelation. Chachmei La, Chachmei Tata, Malchus. If you recall, Mishnah, he talked about Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, as the difference between Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, or the other way, the order. Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, the difference between Chabad, Chagas, and Ihi. So if you really want to get the bigger picture, that too relates very much. And there he did speak also about the generational shifts, the Tanoim, the Amoraim, and then of course going backwards to all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. So that together with this comes together. You start seeing a picture, a historical narrative of how the evolution of divine revelation was on a higher level earlier, and then it became more concealed. But in that concealment, they discovered deeper truths, as we learned. In Torah Sheba'al Peh, when you have to dig deeper, you have to access all the way back to the source, if you recall. But it's not so negated to go into all the details. I just want to make that comparative study between what we're learning here and what we learned there, which is all obviously connected. There it was in Torah. Now we're looking about it in general, Gilui Elokus. So now let's continue on reading. I am on the line that starts Dibar Hashem Imochem. This is like 10 lines, let's see, 3, 6, exactly 10 lines from the top of page 1447. Pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along. So it's a parenthesis, but it just flows from what we learned. So, what did he establish? There's the Beis HaMikdash, which is like the Gilui of Matan Torah. There's Yeshua, and there is Yecheskel after the destruction of the first temple. P'techa Geila, Golus, which is like Yitzira. The Im Kain, so based on this, says the Rebbe Rashab, let me see one thing here. This piece, by the way, with Yecheskel, I wrote on the footnote here, my own footnote, that this is the language of Likutei Torah, the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe Knesher Yoir, and it's cited in the Eira Torah Siddur. Okay, some sources, just if you want to have some sources, I can give you some sources. I don't know if anybody wants to look it up. I'm just saying it for the record. Okay.
You're saying this whole sugya came from a different mimer?
Everything here is coming from different maimarim, just for the record.
I know that.
Sometimes I point out
literally? Verbatim?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Not always verbatim, but the content, you can find another maimarim. Uh-huh. Yeah. I try. At times I actually have, sometimes it's word for word with additions. Sometimes it's just the content. I have marked up in my Ayin Beis full of sources. In the new edition of Ayin Beis, you'll see down below in the footnotes, not the edition I'm using, you'll see hundreds of footnotes, which give you the sources for almost everything, for everything actually. I actually gave them a lot of my notes, so they included that there too. But some places it's very fundamental, like the Maimer HaMagbi is clearly the Rebbe Rashab keeps returning to it. I have pointed out throughout when we learned certain Maimarim, Hamagbi, Lesheves, the Maimer V'hayenenu Me'ires, the Maimer Yosef Avenu he keeps returning to now. And this is additional Maimer, which is also brought from the Tzemach Tzedek also is connected to this. He cites it. Let me just see something here, 1 second. Yeah, Maimer Benorim and Mishta Niganosam. Another Maimer from the Alter Rebbe. Yeah. If anybody's interested in more sources and more breakdown, I generally give from time to time a general sources. But if you want a real breakdown, I would suggest writing to me and I can give you more details if you really want to study. But it takes a lot of time to go through all the other Maimarim because now we actually learn Maimarim here. We learned the whole Maimar of Magbi from the Alter Rebbe, from the Mittler Rebbe. We learned the Maimar from different sections that we've learned over the time that I took other Maimarim. So in some places it's worthwhile actually learning it. In my essay that I'm writing, I'm quoting a lot from the other Maimarim as well. Okay. I just noticed that I had written this. So now he says like this. The Imkain, and this is in addition of the Rebbe Rashab, this parentheses. This is not in the Maimer that I just cited, Likutei Torah. Likutei Torah, just for the record, it's the Maimer of Hazinu 77D, page 77D. So says the Rebbe Rashab, the Imkain, based on this, Hoye Bizman Habayis Hagili Lamailo Gam B'Yimei Yeshua. During the time of the Beis Hamikdash, according to what we just learned, it comes because that it's higher than Yeshua because he's comparing it to Matan Torah. Matan Torah is even before the Chet HaEgel. Yeshua is after the Chet HaEgel, and Yeshua is after the generation of Moshe. So the Rebbe Rashab is deriving from this that the level of Zman HaBayis is higher than the time of Yeshua. V'hainu, and he elaborates a bit more. So now I'm going to bring an Eitz Chaim. I don't know how good your memories are, but you may recall this Eitz Chaim was cited earlier, especially in the beginning of volume 3, literally in the beginning. So he says, "V'hainu k'meshkosa be'Eitz Chaim," like it says in Eitz Chaim. That's from the Arizal. Shar Miyot HaYerech Perek Beis. So it's a section called Miyot HaYerech, the diminishing of the moon. That's the name of the gate. Gate meaning a section in Eitz Chaim, chapter 2. So there, if you may recall, we discussed 7 levels of Malchus throughout history. So you see here clearly the Rebbe Rashab is understanding the context. So there Malchus, in its lowest level, Malchus deep in Golus, descends below and is concealed. But then he enumerates 7 levels, what he calls Aliyas HaMalchus, all the way to the highest, which will be when Mashiach comes. So if you think of Malchus as the moon, you can think of the moon as a new moon where the moon is completely diminished. You can think of the moon as somewhat bright, but not as bright at its fullest. You could think of the moon as a full moon, which then it's fully reflecting the sun, but it's still a moon. And then you can think of the moon, like it says, when the moon will be the light of the moon, that the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. And there's even other levels. There's an 8th level that he mentions all in the beginning of Ayin Beis, volume 3. If you want the exact page number, it's literally the 2nd page of this volume, which would be page 1208 and 1209. So he doesn't spell all the 7 levels. He refers to them, but he's referring it to now as well. So we're not going to go through all 7 right now. It's not really relevant to our discussion, but we did discuss it then, and I think I wrote it out as well. I don't remember. I think I spelled them out when we learned it back then. So what does he say there? The Bebayis Rishon, during the first temple, Hoyse b'Malchus, HaMalchus b'Madrega Havav. Malchus was on the 6th level, which is a high level. The 7th would be the highest, La'asid Lave. It was on the 6th level. K'moisha Hoysa be'es Mitzias Mitzrayim. As it was when they left by Yitzias Mitzrayim, v'oid l'mayla mizeh. And even higher than that, Yu'un Sham. He's telling us to look there. So when he spells out the levels, he says, the Gilead Beis Rishon, Malchus was on the 6th level, which means it elevated quite high in comparison to Zah. Remember, Zah and Malchus are the two, Mashpia Mekabel. So those are the two that play itself out. Malchus is always the level. Like, for example, when you say, I've talked about this many times, about Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the 9 days in the month of Av was the destruction of the temple. 9 is not an accident. It's 9 because it's missing Malchus. Malchus was diminished. So the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash reflected a missing Malchus, so to speak. Now, obviously, it wasn't missing completely, but it was missing its connection to the other 9. So you call it 9 Tisha Yom. You say 10 spheres, you say 10 and not 9 and not 11. That's a full number. That's a full, complete Gilui. So Malchus is always the level where which reflects, very much connected to what we learned, that all the Hanhogas, that Maisa Tachtenim, all the potter's wheel of Malchus is where everything plays itself out. How much Malchus is receiving from Atzilus, how much it's manifesting in Biyah, how concealed, how revealed. Malchus is, of course, Shechina, when you're talking in context of Kudsha Brichu being Zah. So bottom line, when you say Galusa, Shechinta beGalusa, or like he said before, Galul lebavel Shechina imahem. So the Shechina is, that this context, Shechina is usually Malchus. Even though we did learn Shechina and Kudsha Bricha on all the levels, but generally Malchus is very much associated with that. So essentially saying that during the first temple, it was on the level of Yetzias Mitzrayim and even higher. Now what that means, we have to look inside there, because it's not level 7. Or else he would have called it the 7th level. It's level 6 with an addition. So Yetzias Mitzrayim was a high level, but Bais Rishon was even higher. Because remember, Yetzias Mitzrayim, there was no Mishkan yet. The Mishkan was not built till after Matan Torah. So clearly, the Mishkan added another dimension of a Shechanti B'Seicham. So that's what he says. So what do you see from this? That's clearly higher than the level of Yeshua. Because Yeshua comes after Moshe. So it's true, Yeshua is higher than Yecheskel, who's after the destruction of the first temple. See, here you have Moshe, you have, let's say, Yetzias Mitzrayim, Bais Rishon, more or less the same level, Bais Rishon a little higher. Then you have Yeshua, and then you have Yecheskel. I'm just summing it up to keep context there. I'll continue to learn this further. Now he's going to continue this discussion. What level is the level of the Beis Hamikdash in context of Matan Torah? And, well, he didn't mention Matan, he mentioned Yetzias Mitzrayim, but we'll soon learn about Matan Torah too. Before I continue, I just want to make sure if anyone wants to ask anything. It's not finished yet. There's more to say. It's just on what we've just learned. Are there any questions? So he says now,
sorry, when we say, when the Rebbe says, when you say as you're reading that Malchus is at a, let's say, a higher level, does that mean that there's a greater revolution of Elikus in the world generally at that time in history, and that humans or didn't at that time in history are, as it were, kiviyachol, closer to godliness? It's like we say now that godliness is the choshek is kafel and mechupel, like as dark as like the darkest of dark. So are we saying that in these other times it was dark but not quite so dark? Is that the inyan there?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but that's a rule no matter even without Ayin Beis. Like when someone said, what was happening during the first temple, the second temple? You know, there was basically it was a higher revelation of Elikus, and that's essentially what it was. I mean, I'm saying even if you don't learn Ayin Beis, we know that.
Yeah, but it's just talking about what level of Malchus is corresponding with that notion.
Yeah, but that's the level. But I'm saying the point that you're asking is about darkness. It's exactly right. When there's more revelation, there's more revelation. There are times in history, like when there's the Beis Hamikdash is standing, when Mashiach comes and we'll have the third temple, obviously will be the highest level, even higher. But that's correct. It reflects the levels of divine revelation in the world. Yeah.
Thank you. I thought so. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. So now, the Bechaye, Rabbeinu Bechaye, famous commentator, he brings in his Kuntres, the end of his book, he has a commentary on the Torah, and the end he has an additional so-called text, additional entry. And he quotes from there, Kosav, he writes there, the ponim b'ponim, when it says ponim b'ponim by Matan Torah, that they saw God face to face, like we referred to right before the parentheses, he says, what is that in Kabbalah? Hu tiferes ba'ateres. He calls it Tiferes Ba'teres. The Rabbeinu Bachai does cite Kabbalistic thoughts. As you know, if you ever read the commentary of Bachai, he brings commentary on every verse, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. If you're interested, the Bachai brings all four. So he quotes Kabbalistic ideas, and he was obviously a great Mekubal. So he says there that Ponim B'Ponim means Tiferes Ba'teres. Now, literally, Tiferes Ba'teres, Ateres is like a crown. So it means the Gilui of Tiferes in Ateres. What does this mean? So you're going to explain. Hainu, Gilui Tiferes, the Zah. Tiferes, of course, is the center of Zah. Zah, Zoir Ampin, is the small face, includes 6 mides. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod. Like we learned earlier, Tiferes is usually the center, because it's like the centerpiece, the middle path, or like the spine, you wish. It's the middle, Kavam Tzoi, Chesed is to the right, Gvura is to the left, Tiferes in that center. Then comes Netzach to the right, Hoid and Yesod in the center. But Tiferes is the central point of Zah. So sometimes when we say Tiferes, it's like the essence of Zah. So he says, this is referring to the Gili of Tiferes de Zah, Shazel Pnimi Zah. That's the Pnimius of Zah. Chesed of Zah also has a Pnimius and a Chesenius. But Tiferes, compared to the others, is always the Pnimius, the inner, like I said, the middle path, the middle rod. Kavam Soy, Amavriach min Akotza la Kotza. So it travels all the way up to Keser, goes all the way down to Yesod and Malchus. It's like the center, like a spine, sometimes compared to the spine. So the Kamasha Kosa b'Sidr b'Shar HaMoedim, like he writes in Sidr. The Sidr is the Mittler Rebbe composed and compiled a Sidr, as we know. It's called Sidr im Dach, Sidr with Chassidus, where he took all the Mamorim that he had heard from the Alter Rebbe and organized them according to the order of the prayer, of the prayers, which is Shachris, Mincha, Meir, Shabbos, Yom Tov. It has everything in there. And recently they released a new edition with a lot of notes, very, very comprehensively annotated. So in Siddur Shar HaMoyedim, he says this, that Tiferes is Pnimi Zah, Heir begili bebchinis HaMalchus. So Tiferes ba'Ateres, I mentioned before, Ateres can mean crown, Keser, but it could also mean Malchus, because Malchus also becomes Keser Malchus. So he's saying, the Bachai is saying that Ponim B'Ponim, the face of Tiferes, the Pnimius of Zah, is radiating where? Into Malchus, into Ponim of Ateres of Malchus. That's what he's teaching here. Gili Tiferes de Zah, Pnimius Zah, Heir begili b'bchinas HaMalchus. So that, of course, is Malchus on a high level. That's not a diminished state of Malchus. Malchus is receiving from the Pnimius of Zah, from Tiferes. That's Ponim B'Ponim. Ukasher Malchus, says the Rebbe Rashab now, Hoya, b'madreges Havov, when Malchus reaches the 6th level, remember we spoke about the 7 levels of Malchus elevation, and we said Yitzis Mitzrayim and Bayis Rishon is the 6th level. The Hainu, Sheyushovin became Mosan, which means that they are equal in stature. What means equal in stature? When Malchus is in a diminished state, it's not equal in stature with Zah and with the Tiferes of Zah. Because Malchus is like the moon, especially a moon, a diminished moon. You can't compare the moon to the sun. The moon is makabel, it receives from the sun. But then there's the level when the moon arises or elevates, and Malchus elevates, and it's receiving from Tiferes, from the Pnimius of Zah, Tiferes of Zah, what he calls Tiferes Ba'Ateres. Then its Shavin is called, in the language of Eitz Chaim and other places, equal in stature. So it means Malchus is now equal in stature. Is it exactly the same? That he discusses in Eitz Chaim. But comparatively speaking, you call it Shavin b'kei Mosan. So then, Lo Yashum Helam Klal. And in that state, there's no Helam at all. Malchus is aligned and receiving directly from the core source of Zah. While Yemeir b'chinas Pnimis ha'er begili. The Ponim. That means Ponim b'Ponim. That the inner dimension of the air is radiating in a revealed way. when Malchus is in the diminished state, when there's Golus, or other levels of diminishment, not the sixth level, the fifth level, the fourth level, the third level, definitely the second and the first level, then Malchus is not on that level. So he's describing the Kabbalistic anatomy and dynamics of what does it mean when you say a Gilia Lakus in Yetzias Mitzrayim, and a little more so in Bayis Rishon. That is the level of Tiferes Ba'ateres, the Madrega Havav in Eitz Chaim, the sixth level of Malchus elevation. And he continues with more sources and more details. This is the Alter Rebbe now. In Teira Eir Pasha Truma, Beloshen Admudnish Meseiden. So let me just explain what that means. Even though the whole Teira Eir is from the Alter Rebbe, but there are two places in Teira Eir that's printed that says clearly that this is the Alter Rebbe's own handwriting. So remember, the Maimorim of Teira Eir and Likutei Teira were delivered by the Alter Rebbe, but was written down by Manichim, Chayzrim and Manichim. What I did in our generation, there were people at a lot higher level, obviously. In the time of the Alter Rebbe, that's what they did. And I think I've mentioned a number of times. The Chayzrim and Manichim of the Alter Rebbe's time, generally speaking, we know of 5. There are many, but the main primary ones was the Mariel, Rabbi Yehuda Leib, the Alter Rebbe's brother. Most of Torah Eir is from him. He wrote closest to the original language of his brother, the Alter Rebbe. You have the Mittler Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's oldest son. You have Rab Moshe, the Alter Rebbe's youngest son. You have Rab Pinchas Reizes, who's a big chassid of the Alter Rebbe. He also wrote, as well as the Tzemach Tzedek when he came of age, approximately Tavkuf Samach. Tavkuf Samach Hey, maybe Tavkuf Samach Daled, maybe. Basically, because remember the Tzemach Tzedek was a child and was not yet ready to write, but later he started writing. So sometimes we have a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, 5 versions from all 5 that I just mentioned. But regardless, but then there are pieces, namely 2 pieces in Parshas Chayei Sarah and in Parshat Truma, where it's Beloshen Admurnish Meseiden Ba'atzmei, sometimes the expression is. Here he just says Beloshen Admurnish Meseiden, means he wrote it himself. He himself wrote these pieces. Obviously, the Alter Rebbe was a writer. He wrote the whole Tanya. Tanya, the Alter Rebbe himself wrote, and the Shulchan Aruch too. But Torah Eir, this section he actually wrote, and what did he write there? The b'matan Torah hoya shoven became masan. Now he's mentioning matan Torah, panim b'panim. That by matan Torah, Malchus and Zah were equal in stature. Kema is like height, equal in height, equal in stature. The chen hoya b'zman habayis, and so too was it in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. So here we have the different sources. Just to sum up, that the Eitz Chaim says that Bayis Rishon was like Yetzias Mitzrayim and a bit higher. The 6th level of Malchus, which is Shavim B'Kemosan with Zah. The words of the Bechai is Tiferes Ba'ateres, that the premise of Zah is shining and radiating into Malchus. And now from the Alter Rebbe, we're Matan Torah. So he's now equating Yetzias Mitzrayim, Matan Torah, and the first Beis Hamikdash are all similar level. That 6th level of Aliyas HaMalchus, what he calls Shavin B'Kemosan, is the Malchus elevating to the same level as Zah. Okay. So that of course tells us that's higher than Yeshua. Because Yeshua was not the time of the Zman HaBayis, was not Matan Torah. It was a level lower. Not as low as Yecheskel, which is already Golus, B'techa Geila, after the destruction of the first temple, but still lower than this level of Matan Torah, where you see Mitzrayim and Bayis Rishon. Any questions before I continue? So now he brings another Bachai. This is, as I've often pointed out, there are times the Rebbe Rashab loads up on sources to really ground things and bring references to where all these ideas are. So it's really essentially a thorough overview of all these different levels, and into something you can really, it's like an authoritative summation of all these different revelations. So now he brings another B'chayim, B'Parsha Kisisa, B'Parsha Sisa. So Parsha Sisa, of course, is a very fundamental chapter where Moshe and Hashem have their dialogue after the Chet Egel, and God reveals the 13 attributes of compassion. Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim. That's where Moshe asks, "Show me your face." Harein Noch Veidecha, and God says, "You cannot see my face and live." It's a very fundamental chapter in the context of different levels of divine revelation. So the B'chai in Parsha Sisa, on which pasuk? The Dibar Hashem al Moshe, that God spoke to Moshe, Kosav, the B'chai writes there, it's a different B'chai, it's the same commentary, but a different place. The Ponim B'Ponim, this idea of face-to-face, that the Torah refers to in different ways. By Matan Torah, it also refers to by Moshe, that Moshe was the only one that spoke to God face-to-face. So clearly there are different levels of Ponim B'Ponim. There's also Ponim El Ponim, and there's Ponim B'Ponim. She's not going into right now, so I'm not going to go into that. So he cites there, Ponim B'Ponim, Hu Ke'inyan Asher Ayin Ba'ayin Nira Ata Hashem. He compares it to another verse, Ayin Ba'ayin, eye to eye, God will appear. Hu Pirish Ayin Ba'ayin, what means eye to eye? Hu Sha'ayin Di Yichud Elah. So one eye is referring to the vision, or you can say the supervision. Ayin, like an eye that supervises, that watches. Al-Kashgacha of Yichud Elah. Eich shalamayla yesh lamata kala. So what does Yichud Elah teach us? That God is reality, and everything in existence is like nothing. Not the other way around. Yichud Tata tells us there's an existence, but the existence, you should know, is coming from a creator. So the yesh is lamata, and the ayin lamayla. Yichud Elah is the opposite. The yesh is lamayla, and the ayin is lamata. Because the world and all of existence is like nothing compared to the real yesh, real existence. From Yichud Tata's point of view, we have an existence is the yesh, and we come to discover that it's coming from a state of non-matter or non-existence, as we've learned, yesh ma'ayin. So there's yesh le'ayin and there's yesh me'ayin. So Yichud Elah is that the yesh is lamayla, ulamata kilo. So this level of perception, or you can say awareness, and bitl of Yichud Elah, when you say ayin be'ayin, you're saying that this higher level of Yichud Elah, mislabish, it manifests and gets enclosed b'toich ayin di Yichud Tata, within the so-called vision of Yichud Tata, the lower level. Shehu is galus bitla yesh, where there is the revelation of bitla yesh, not bitla mitzias. Yichud Elah is saying all of existence doesn't exist in comparison to the true reality called godliness, as we learned earlier as well. We talked about hamayrik be'echad. But he's saying now, Yichud Tata is bitla yesh. Yichud Tata is not saying nothing exists. It says it exists, but it's bottle to the Dvar Hashem, to the word of God that energizes it, that sustains it. But that's two separate levels of bitl. Yichud Allah is teaching that God is the only reality and existence is only godliness. The lower level says there's existence, but existence is driven by godliness. So now he's saying ayin ba'ayin is the joining of, the fusion of these two levels of bittul. Ayin ba'ayin, so you have the gili of the higher level of Yichud Elah ayin, ba'ayin into the lower level of Yichud Tata, bittul hayesh. V'hainu, the metech ayin, the Yichud Tata, hisigu ayin the Yichud Elah. So he's explaining, because you could also learn in two ways. You can learn it from the top down or from the bottom up. So he says that from the eye of Yichud Tata, meaning we begin from the perspective from below, from the eye, our eye, of looking at the world, and from the world we extrapolate that there's a divine creator. From that eye, hisigu, they were able to comprehend the ayin of Yichudei Elah. No, it's not just godliness as it relates to existence. They are able to appreciate and perceive and experience, you can say even. Well, Hisigu is comprehending the higher level of ayin of Yichudei Elah. So this is what he takes from the second Bechai from Parsha Kisisa. So what do you see here? Obviously, this is a very high level. That's what means Shavim became Mosan, Malchus, which generally would be, Malchus would be on its own, would be the Ayin Lamata. And Teferes of Zah would be Ayin Lamaila. But when there's the Gili of what he called here now, Yitzis Mitzrayim, Matan Torah, and Bayis Rishon, then there was a level where Malchus elevated to this point where the Ayin Lamata could see the Ayin Lamaila. So it's somewhat already alluding, more than alluding. Remember, we talked later, we're going to learn the end of Ayin Beis, how these two Yichudim come together. And he was already mentioning it here. But that's what he's defining as being the sixth level. Okay. Any questions?
This is the level that we're shooting for when we say Shema. Later as we learn in the Maimarim Hamagbi L'Sheves, well, that's, ultimately it's all about Yichudim.
Well, yes. I just said, the end of Ayin Beis, he's going to discuss this at length. That's what I just said.
6:30 here. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. I just said that at the end of Ayin Beis is going to elaborate on this. He's already mentioning it here. But the real elaboration is going to come later on this topic.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, don't worry about it. I'm just mentioning that. Fine. We will learn about it at length. My point is that's the main thing.
At some point, maybe at the end of the class, can you tell us what the seventh level looks like? Is that Mashiach?
If you go back to the pages for 1208 and 120, he talks about it there.
Which page?
1208 and 1209.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one more piece here. He's bringing out yet another source. Is in Ve'era, page 23b, Va'avuan have a chamon. Now he's talking about the Avos. Avuan is the Avos in Aramaic. The patriarchs have a chamon. Chamon in Hebrew is to see. Megav inun gvanin disgalian inun stimen de kayomim elayu. Okay, he's entering now. Now wants to say, what about the Avos? This is before Matan Torah. What level of revelation did they have in this context? So the Zohar says they saw from within the outer revealed colors, they saw that which was hidden above that sustained them. In other words, from the surface level, they were able to see that which was hidden beneath the surface. In simple English. That's what the Avos saw. So what is that level? So he says, "Va'hefresh ben Moshe la Avos." The difference between Moshe and the patriarchs, the Moshe ra baspaklaria ha'meira. He saw through a clear, transparent glass. Atzma. He saw like a very clear, transparent. V'hainu b'china za atzmai. Like we learned earlier, Shem Havaya atzmai and Atzilus, za itself. U'kamoshin is bar li'il that we learned before on page 1445. Sha'omar, there he brought from the Zohar, Gufa de Shimsha ba'ina. We want to have the very body of the sun. We don't want a malach. We don't want a mamutza. We want the sun itself. What was Shimsha? He said Zah. That's Zah. The Avos, on the other hand, by contrast to Ro, he slapshus baspaklade me'ira baspaklade she'ena me'ira. They saw that transparency that Moshe had, they saw through a garment. It's called a spaklare she'ena me'ira, which is sometimes referred to either a translucent glass, where the light comes through, but not completely like from a clear pane of glass. Literally, espaklal she'eina meira means a non-illuminated glass. But what it means here is that it's not, it's like the light, the pure light going through a curtain, so to speak, or through a glass that has some shade on it. Mashenk and Shara Nevi'im. By contrast, the other prophets. So now we have a third level. We have Moshe, the Avos, the Moshe, and the other, the Nisnavu B'koi B'chinas Aspaklari She'ena Meira. They only had the light that came through the curtain. So there's three levels. Pure light coming through Moshe, pure light coming through some form of shade, and then a light that just comes through the shade. You don't have the pure light is concealed. They're only getting the shaded light. Bilvad. Vasagus and Shamash Yisrael, and the comprehension of the souls of Israel. B'yamei Moshe, in the time of Moshe, ubizman bayis rishon, and the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, hayukamoy madregas ha'avis canal. So Moshe had this level. What about the Yidden, the people? So they say the people in the time of Moshe, in the time of bayis rishon, was one level lower than Moshe, like the Avos canal. That's interesting. Okay. So there you have yet another level. So we have Moshe, we have the Avos, we have the Yidden during time of Moshe and the time of Bayis Rishon, like the Avos, and then you have the other Nevi'im, like we'll learn later about Yecheskel and other Nevi'im, is even a lower level. And then, of course, there's the level of Yeshua, which is probably like the other Nevi'im based on what I'm reading here. I'm not sure yet. Let's see what he says. So it's fascinating how the Rebbe Rashab is not enumerating it like literally like in an encyclopedic order, but maybe that would be a good idea just to take, because he is creating here a real outline of different levels of Gili. And I've so far spelled out some of them. Okay. It's a develop. I say if you go slowly, we could, I think, figure it out, but you have to go very slowly. I want to stop here because I have something I must do. I would have liked to read more, but it's going to take time. It's not going to be a minute, because he's now going to go into the difference between ponim, bit ponim, and ponim, el ponim, which I mentioned earlier. So we'll learn that tomorrow. I'm going to stop here. Any questions? I'll stop by the Ramaz. It's going to bring yet another commentary. And this parenthesis goes all the way till 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Bottom of the paragraph, I should say. Okay, so let's stop here.
Can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead.
You may not have an answer, but first of all, this information is important and fascinating and helpful for our own path, our own mission in terms of accomplishing the Yichudim. So I don't mean to say it doesn't have intrinsic value, but I'm wondering if you could, if you can, maybe you can't, give us like a Chassidus applied, a Balabatisha perspective on like what can this teach us like right now for us? I mean, besides like that, there are these different perspectives of Gilui Elakus, and we have to strive for the most transparent, and that's what the Yehudim are all about. But is there something we can take away? Like, what do we learn from the fact that there were these different levels of Gilui Elakus at different times in Jewish history? I mean, it's important. Is there something?
I discussed it yesterday.
Yeah.
And I said it has to be personalized. I think you just have to ask yourself a simple question. When you woke up this morning, where do you stand? Before you daven, after you daven? A person who takes seriously God, to always ask themselves, when you wake up in the morning, sometimes you're inspired, sometimes you're not. You just have to find different forms of experience that we have. Some people on Shabbos feel very elevated. Sometimes you feel less so. In shul, by Farbrengen, I mean, you simply have to look at your life and see the different type of stages we're in this context. Now,
Mm.
good prayer, a good davening, especially in the morning, should be a journey through 4 levels. Through Asiya, Yitzira, Bria, and Atzilus.
Mhm.
So they have 4 levels of revelation right there. At neshama shenasata b'tahirihi, at barasa, at yitzarta, at nefachta bi, at meshamra b'kirbi. Yom Kippur, a person could be highly inspired, and more than other times of the year. You go to Eretz Yisrael, but you go to the wall. I mean, there's so many different scenarios. The applied is very simple. You just have to ask yourself, where do you stand?
Mhm.
Instead of going into all these intricate things, Ayin Beis lays out the blueprint, the whole picture. Now
Yeah.
each of us have our own times. There are times where we feel the Rebbe encouraged people to make from their homes a mishkan,
Mhm.
a Beis Chabad he called it, a Beis Torah Aveda Gemilas Chasad, to have in your house, in all your room. Even children should have in their room a siddur, which is tefillah, a chumash, Torah, and a pushka, tzedakah. So the home becomes saturated and elevated to being like a shtickle mishkan. Talk about a Beis Hamikdash. Obviously, it's not the Beis Hamikdash Bayis Rishon, Bayis Sheni, or Bayis Shlishi, but relative to each one of us. So it's simply taking these ideas and just applying it. When you live a day, at the end of the day, you can come and make a cheshbon nefesh at the end of the day and say, today I added in tzedakah, in Torah, in tefillah. I was kind to people. I did a mitzvah here, the mitzvah there. I'm not talking about being proud about it, just simply being aware. This means you brought godliness into your life. Now, the Rebbe talks about learning about Geula Mashiach, being more Mashiachdik, which means being more, obviously more, it's all about whether you're going to be more egoistic and more focused on you and your needs and your self-interest, or on God's interests and God's goal and God's purpose for you in this world. So to me, it's
Yeah.
simply everything we
Beautiful.
learn everywhere. This is what it manifests.
Yeah,
Now, I'm not
100%.
going into each of these levels because each level, each of us talk to our mashpia or yourself. You can figure out how each one applies. We have the Avos within us, we have Moshe within us, we have Matan Torah within us, we have Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah within us, we have the Mishkan and Beis Hamikdash within us, and we have, of course, Golus within us. So whatever level you're at, we have here a corresponding divine experience.
Beautiful. Thank you. If you said it yesterday, it certainly didn't resonate yesterday like it did today. I don't doubt you, but
No,
this is
it's fine. It's all right. This is
very
the
helpful.
truth is I would have not. This is not a complaint. I would have expected everyone here being able to say what I just said. I didn't say anything here like some big chiddush. It's something which I think is just a given, but it's sometimes important to spell out. Listen, we're all learning together, and I just spelled it out. But the fact is, this is exactly how you apply all this is by personalizing it each one of us to our level.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Now, listen, if I gave a whole class on this, I would probably break it down and actually show different levels, the difference between the Avos within us, Matan Torah, Moshe, and the other levels he's speaking about here. There's more. Yeshua I didn't mention. So it all can be applied. You just have to find the fluctuations, if you wish, of our own journey.
Yeah,
every day, every week.
it's true. I'll just to reflect briefly. I know you got to go, but I'll just speak for myself. Like there are
You gave
some
me a few
days,
more minutes, so I have a few more minutes.
I'll just speak for myself. Like I wish I could say I'm running around feeling you like Haley all the time, but there's like you said, there are sometimes you're feeling it more than other times. So it just sort of gives new meaning to the phrase like I'm not feeling it. Like so some days you go to Shul on Shabbos and you're just like the sun couldn't be brighter and you couldn't feel closer to the Abishter. You couldn't feel like it's a more special day. And then there are days where you can barely get through your tefillah because whatever, you got shpilkus, I don't know. And then you say, I'm just not feeling it. But your mom is not feeling it because you're at a madrega that's not as high. Right?
Exactly, and listen, it's literally like navigating the vicissitudes of the waves of your life. You're on the water. Sometimes it's a calm day. Sometimes it's a stormy day, and it's all about navigating. There are times where you have to brace yourself and dig deeper because it's going to be difficult. Even people go through, whether it's moods or life experiences. Sometimes you go through things that are very difficult, challenges. Then there are times where you really, it's a calm day and you can just forge ahead. Like I always talk about a good swimmer. A good swimmer navigates. That's what a good swimmer is. Not that they know how to handle a storm better than someone else. They just know not to fight the storm and go with the waves and sometimes just float and allow yourself to be carried. Not always good to fight the tide. You have to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Beautiful, Rabbi.
Really, thank you. That's just wonderful. There's a lot of wisdom in there. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah. I don't mean fold by surrender, by the way. I meant
I know.
yeah,
Buckle down
when
to
to
the
let
storm.
go, sometimes when to forge ahead. It's the
Well,
wisdom
also-
of life.
Yeah.
And it's navigating it. It's like the wheel, the turning wheel.
I have a question, and it's been bothering me for
Go
years.
Go ahead.
Years. I mean, I try to make it. I guess it applies to the men. I got a minion, if possible, 3 times a day, and there are times when I can't keep up with the chazan if I want to get real meaning in my davening. Which is more important, to keep up with the chazan, stay with the minion, because I know that brings your prayers up, or just to do it yourself, And
My advice usually is as follows. When the minion comes to things like Baruch or Kedusha, obviously, or Shema, you'll say it with a minion. But the most important thing is to personalize it. And even if you're not holding with a minion, you can always, let's say you're up to Baruch Sha'amar and they're already up to Baruch. So you say Baruch, or you say Kedusha with them, or you answer Amen. But you daven at your pace. I would say your pace is more important than sticking completely with the minion.
thank you.
That's my general answer. Now, obviously, because I think it's much more meaningful to rush with a minion that knocks off davening in 20 minutes or half hour. It's most likely not going to be anything, let's call it integrated. Maybe Beruchnius or Makif, obviously it has an effect just being the synergy of the group, but it's not I write in 60 days, the Alter Rebbe writes in Hilchos Yom Kippur, to say one prayer with kavanah is more valuable than saying a lot of prayers without.
Gotcha, thanks.
Yeah.
One more question, maybe you will answer tomorrow. I cannot understand how Jews during the time of Moshe were on the level of our fathers when they had so many troubles and they had so many misunderstandings with the Meraglim, with food, all kind of arguing with Moshe. What does it mean they were on the level of Avos?
That's the only thing you know about them. They also stood at Matan Torah. They were considered an enlightened age. They were on the level of being, Moshe Rabbeinu was their Rebbe. They had tremendous, tremendous souls, and from the highest level of all souls. That's what we learn. And yet, yes, they had their challenges, and every one of them was also deep challenges. So, bottom line is they were from the highest levels of souls in all of history. That's what it says in so many places. The 600,000 original general souls that went out of Egypt. I mean, I can show you my Morim that talk about it at length, where they talk about the level of souls, but it was from the highest level of souls. They were commensurate to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe and them were on very close. I mean, Moshe was, of course, the leader and higher than them. And why not? They're the grandchildren of the Avos. They were just great, it was just 7 generations from Avram Avinu. So don't you think their parents taught them a few things?
Yes, but even Moshe said, I cannot give them meat. How can I give them? Because there was a disconnection.
Okay, you're only learning one half of the story. There's the other half that they were on a tremendously high level. And the Torah speaks about You're only focusing on the challenging stories. There's also the other parts. They built a temple, a Mishkan for 40 years. They traveled through the wilderness. You know, the Torah tells us everything, tells us also about their setbacks or their challenges. They built a golden calf and other things as well. But when you start learning about it, you start wondering, how did they do that? And you realize there was a lot deeper things happening. They weren't just petty, small people.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Remember the expression in the Talmud, Kadla Godel Mechaveri Yitzrei Godel Mimer. The greater the person, the greater their Yetzer Hara.
This is the answer. I got it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's stop here. Add a little more time because they gave me more time. We'll stop here.